All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Shelley Anand with Tahare Justice Center here in Atlanta. Thank you for joining us for this virtual training on the public charge and family-based petitions. We're really lucky to have Amy Hauer with us from Catholic Charities here in Atlanta to speak about this rule and the impact it's going to have or is having on family-based petitions. Um, I'm going to give a quick little intro to Amy and then let her go from there. And then Amy, did you want folks to introduce themselves on
Yes.
video? Okay, cool.
Well,
So
audio is fine if you haven't done your hair today.
yeah. Okay. Um, so Amy Fairchild Howard is the Senior Program Director of Immigration Legal Services at Catholic Charities Atlanta. She has been practicing immigration law since 2008. Catholic Charities Atlanta provides general immigration legal services with particular specialties in working with detained persons, unaccompanied alien children, victims of crime, and low-income families. So with that, if folks could either introduce themselves in the chat or unmute and introduce yourself, or even show us your beautiful faces on video, that would be great.
Hi, Amy. This is Eileen. I'm the Social Services Program Manager in the Tahari office in Atlanta. So nice to see you. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Thanks, Eileen.
Hello, everybody. My name is One Carrington, and I'm the social services intern at Tahari in the Atlanta office. I am a senior at Agnes Scott College, and I'm a women's studies major.
Awesome. Thanks, One.
I'm Jeff. I'm a legal intern at the Tahrir Atlanta office. I don't want to tell you the last time I did my hair, so I probably should.
Well, yeah, you can see what's going on here. So,
Yeah.
okay, and thanks, Gabriela and Emily and Cindy, for introducing yourselves.
I can go. I'm Michelle. I'm in the Baltimore field office, Tahare. I'm going to be a 3L at Georgetown.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, Michelle.
I'll go next. Hi, everybody. My name is Monique. I'm a resident 2L at Emory Law, and I'm a legal intern for Tahari Justice Center at their Atlanta office.
Thank you, Monique.
Oh, and Paige, you introduced yourself in the chat, so I think that's everyone. Okay, so yes, I'm Amy Hare. I'm the Senior Program Director of Immigration Legal Services at Catholic Charities Atlanta. Although a fun fact about me is that my 3L second semester, I interned with Tahare Falls Church when I was at GW Law, so clearly GW is far superior to Georgetown. No apologies to the Georgetown student. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can start talking about family petitions and the new public charge rule. So one quirk of this video chat system is that I can now not see you at all. But I fully encourage you to just pop in with questions, interrupt me. I told my husband right before I got on that I was going to tell this story. So maybe 10 years ago, his friend came over and was going to be playing tennis with him. And I knew that his friend had a girlfriend who was from Mexico. And so I said, oh, hey, like if you ever want to run ideas by me, let me know if you're ever filing anything. And he said, wait, what do you do? And I said, I'm an immigration lawyer. Didn't you know that? And then he and I proceeded to have a back and forth conversation that it was exclusively letters and numbers, right? He said, oh, wait, you are? I filed the 129F. And I said, wait, you filed the K1? And my husband looks like he's watching a tennis match and has no idea what's going on. And what he was saying was that he was engaged and had filed the fiance petition for his fiance. So that all is a long way of saying, if you have any questions at all, if I start speaking in letters and numbers that you don't understand, because I've been doing this for far too long, just let me know. Here's my contact info. It's just ahair@ccatlanta.org. And here's where our offices are. We are right down the street from USCIS Atlanta, and we share space with International Rescue Committee. And this is just my office. Catholic Charities Atlanta has 3 different offices in the Atlanta metro area. We're the Northlake/Tucker office, depending on how you want to call us. And then we have an office in Smyrna and an office in Chamblee. And Catholic Charities is a general social services organization. We have a wide variety of services, including mental health counseling, housing counseling, financial literacy. We resettle refugees, all sorts of different things going on, but we also have immigration legal services, and we're a pretty large team. We have 17 people, including, I always have to do a mental count because we've had some staff turnover, including 5 attorneys, including myself. Okay, so getting into the meat of it, the family petition system, a little bit of history. Up until the 1950s, the government had quotas based on where you were from. And there were some grounds of inadmissibility, not letting people into the country, but generally it was just those numbers based on country of origin. And in the 1950s, the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed, and the first version of it, and we use an updated version of it now. And it was considered to be very humane to say, rather than just go on pure numbers and country of origin, we want to be in the business of reuniting families, right? And so ever since then, the majority of people who come to the United States with their green card or get their green card in the United States, residency, LPR status, whatever you want to call it, the majority of the people come through family petitions, okay? It absolutely dwarfs employment-based or humanitarian forms of relief. So there are 2 different, within the family petition system, 2 different categories of people, and then there's subcategories of the second category. The first is the immediate relative, spouses and children who are under the age of 21 of US citizens, okay? So I always give examples of my family, and they probably hate me for it, but my brother is married to a Korean woman, and so when they got married, she became an immediate relative. And he filed an I-130 for her, and she was living abroad, so she caused the process. We're going to talk about that in a second. But the whole process took a couple years. So even though it says immediate relative and they can process their things immediately, the process is still quite long, very frequently. And that's only being made worse by the fact that USCIS was closed for 3 months just now. My knowledge, all consulates remain closed except for emergency services to US citizens. So then we have the preference categories. So there's family preference 1, unmarried adult children of citizens. And doesn't that sound like an oxymoron, adult children? That means, it makes much more sense in Spanish. That's my second language. So adults who are your children, okay? So if I have a son who's over the age of 21, goes in category 1. Then 2A is spouses and children who are under 21 of residents. 2B, unmarried adult children of residents. 3, married adult children of citizens. And 4, siblings of citizens. And I have to go back to this list very regularly because I very consistently confuse. I can never remember which is married versus unmarried between category 1 and 3. But who do you not see there? Cousins, aunts, uncles, and very notably, married adult children of residents. So despite working for a Catholic organization that generally encourages people to get, and the Catholic Church generally encourages people to get married, I find myself in the odd position of explaining to people why getting married would make their petition go poof, right? Because if they're in that 2B category and they get married, their petition goes away. It's gone. But why would they care about that, right? Well, let's look at the chart below. This is the chart for family-sponsored immigration for the Visa Bulletin for June 2020, so this month. Now, the Visa Bulletin is published by the State Department every month, and here's how I explain it to clients. There are a certain number of green cards that they can give out based on each family relationship. Immediate relatives, there's no cap. It's unlimited. That's why they can be processed, quote unquote, immediately, even though that can take a couple years. In the preference categories, though, there are limits to the number of family one preference category green cards they can give out each year, or 2A or 2B or 3 or 4. And while I said we decided to be humanitarian and start bringing families together, we do separate out mainland China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines from the rest of the world. And that is because if we didn't do that, then the vast majority of green cards would go to those 4 countries. Those are the 4 largest countries that send people to the United States with green card families.
We're still on the first slide.
Really?
Is there another slide?
Yeah, I'm to like slide 4.
Oh.
Okay, I just switched again. Are you seeing anything?
No, it's still.
You
want? I'm happy to pull it up.
Yeah, why don't you pull? Because I sent it to you yesterday. Why don't you pull it up?
Why don't
I
you
will
do that?
hit stop sharing.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all. No wonder I wasn't getting any questions.
No, this is so
See what I was
helpful to
talking
me.
about.
Give me just a second. I'm just saving it so that I don't lose it. Okay. Okay, can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Okay, and you were on slide number 4, you said?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So this is everything that I was talking about that you couldn't see. But I just started talking about that chart at the bottom. Okay, so that's the State Department issues this chart every month, along with employment-based and some other stuff. And there's a certain number of each category that they can give out. And there's a man at the State Department who I met one time who just does some complicated calculations and says, okay, everybody who filed their petition in category 1, who's from anywhere but the other 4 countries, okay, if they filed it before May 22nd, 2014, now they can move on to step 2. Okay, that's 6 years, right? But it doesn't necessarily move 1 month every month. Sometimes it stays the same, sometimes it goes backwards, but it means that you're waiting a very long time. So I gave that example of talking to people and telling them, like, no, your petition is going to go away if you get married. That might not be a good idea. This is why. Most especially, look at Mexico for category 2B, unmarried. That's February 15th, 1999. So you're waiting over 20 years between when your dad files your petition for you and when you're able to file your application for your green card, either from inside the United States or from outside the United States. And I can also tell you that during those 20 years, the US government isn't very inclined to give you a tourist visa to come to the United States, right? Because your dad's already filed a petition for you, and that means that you probably want to stay in the United States. Consistently, oh, wow, there's something I hadn't noticed. The Philippines category 4 had always been, for a very long time, the longest wait, but that's not true anymore. It's category 1 from Mexico, okay? And so also, one thing to know is that this very long wait can be in the United States, but you have to have a different visa to be here. Okay, you have to be here on a tourist visa, but you have to maintain that tourist visa, and tourist visa's maximum is 6 months, so that can be rather challenging. So generally, people in the preference categories are having to wait outside the United States in order for their date to come current. Any questions? Covered a lot. Okay, we can move on to the next slide.
Oh, sorry. I forgot that was on me. Sorry. It's okay. Friday. Sorry.
So, in order to be able to get your green card, you have to prove that you're admissible to the United States. And INA Section 212 has a laundry list of reasons you can be inadmissible to the United States, right? That's why the I-485, the green card application that you file, is 25 pages long now, I think. Was 21 or 18, and they just added a bunch a few months ago when this new public charge rule came into effect. So one of those grounds of inadmissibility is called public charge. But the INA, what they actually say is any alien, that's the INA's language, not mine, who, in the opinion of the consular officer at the time of an application for visa, or in the opinion of the Attorney General at the time of application for admission or adjustment of status, is likely at any time to become a public charge, is inadmissible. Lots of language to say, yeah, if you are going to be a public charge. And it also lists in the next subsection factors to weigh, which include age, health, family status, assets, resources, financial status, education, and skills. So that's what we have in the law. There are regulations and there are policy memos on top of that that have interpreted this statute for a number, well, since it's been established. And also to know, the INA still has the Attorney General everywhere, but the INS, now USCIS, has not been under the Attorney General for a long time, but they never actually changed the Immigration and Nationality Act. So really, in the opinion of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is really what you could stick in there instead of Attorney General. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to sound like an old fuddy-duddy here, but here's the way things used to be until a few months ago. We would file Form I-864, and the petitioner had to sign a contract with the government saying, look, I am of sufficient means to support this person to 125% of the federal poverty guidelines, and submit some financial information. Usually, 9 times out of 10, that meant submitting their tax returns, showing that they earned an income in the prior year and rolling that person into their household. So on your tax returns, I have myself and my husband and my 2 kids. And if I want to bring my mother-in-law to the United States, we'd be a family of 5. And the government publishes what the poverty guidelines are each year, and you have to multiply that by 1.25. That sounds like a lot of money until you actually look at the federal poverty guidelines. Here, I'm not going to share my screen, but I will quote them to you. So for a family of 4, the federal poverty guideline is $26,200 a year. Okay, so it wasn't a huge threshold. That being said, you guys are all interning at nonprofits. I work at a nonprofit. A lot of our clients are very low income and couldn't prove that. So what would you do if you couldn't show that you could support this person who's coming? Well, you found another person to do it. Had to be a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, and they had to show that they could support this person for up to 10 years to the level of the federal poverty guidelines times 1.25, 125%. And it could be anyone. people would be very concerned and they would talk to me. And I had so many conversations with people saying, oh, no, don't worry about it. You can just find a guy walking down the street. And if he's willing to fill out this form and sign it and give us the paperwork we need, then we're good. Foreshadowing, right? And so that was the way things were for an incredibly long time. And then the State Department especially started changing things, started saying, well, we want the person coming to the United States, because the State Department handles all the applications from outside the United States. They were saying, well, we really want the person to know this person. We want them to have a close familial relationship or quasi-familial relationship. And so we are having to provide evidence of why these people knew each other, because they felt that if it was some perfect stranger signing to agree to sign this form I-864, that they wouldn't actually support them if the need arose. Some interesting facts about the I-864 is that it's a contract between the sponsor and the government. But the beneficiary, the person getting the green card, is a third-party beneficiary to that contract. I have seen cases, multiple, where people have won alimony in a divorce case because the petitioner filed an I-864. And then once in a blue moon, there will be a case of somehow someone who is a recent green card holder manages to receive public benefits, even though in Georgia that is not usually the case. And then the government will sue the person who filed the I-864. So if we move on to slide 7, we can see what it looks like now.
I had a question about that quickly, though.
Sure.
For, you know, if you have U.S. citizen children, a lot of, children are entitled to public benefits. So if your family is below the federal income level and is qualifies for public benefits, you can't even apply on behalf of your U.S. citizen children. Is that the issue?
No, that's not. That was rumored. There was a memo, I want to say it was from Stephen Miller. There was a memo that leaked that said that they were going to do that, but it did not happen.
Okay.
But it does come into play in other ways. So, yeah, so there's the public charge list now. And note that this is with USCIS. So this is people getting their green cards inside the United States. So this is spouses and children of U.S. citizens who have a lawful entry, or people who've maintained continuous lawful presence during their wait. And I apologize that it's really small, but it's really small because all of a sudden the list is incredibly long, right? So hopefully Shelley can share the slides afterwards, and I'm actually going to go to my copy locally on my computer so I can see it better. But there's a very long list of positive factors and negative factors. And Shelley, to get to your question, nowhere on here is receiving public benefits for your children, right? That's still not there. But if you look at negative factors, where is it? Oh, total household income and assets are less than 125% of federal poverty guidelines. So not the fact that you're receiving the benefits for your U.S. citizen children, but your low income that qualifies you to receive the benefits for your children can be problematic. Does that make sense? Okay, good. I like making sense. Okay, so positive factors and negative factors. They made this long list. Some of them line up with each other, some of them are just there. And then there are some that are bold in italics, and that's because USCIS says that those are heavily weighted factors. So all of these factors come from regulations that were published last year and were supposed to go published, I want to say August of last year. Were supposed to go into effect in October of last year. They did not. There was a lawsuit about it that went all the way up to an injunction, but then the appeal of the injunction went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court lifted the injunction. So this new public charge scheme went into effect in February 24th. So positive factors, if you're between the ages of 18 and 61, why do they do that? Well, because they think that's generally working age, right? If you're healthy, that you have no Class A or, I left out a letter, B certification, which is a medical condition that one of the other things you have to do when you're getting a green card is get a medical exam, and there's a list of Class A and Class B issues. But if you come through healthy, that's a positive factor. If you can prove that total household income and assets are greater than or equal to 250% of the federal poverty guidelines, then that's a heavily weighted factor. Or if you can prove that they're greater than or equal to 125% of the federal poverty guidelines, that's just a positive factor, right? And so this is where getting public benefits for your kids comes into play. Or if you have a work permit and you yourself are making more than 250% of the federal poverty guidelines, that's a heavily weighted positive factor. Here's one of the factors that we don't fully understand what it means yet. Private health insurance. Having private health insurance is a heavily weighted positive factor. Having Affordable Care Act subsidized insurance is just a positive factor, not heavily weighted, but Affordable Care Act subsidized is still private insurance. Employer provided, does that count as private insurance? Well, what if your employer is a government? Then that's still public insurance, but it's provided. Yeah, there's a whole lot of questions there that we don't have the answer to yet. And here's one really interesting thing. If you, the intending immigrant, are receiving Medicaid or CHIP or some sort of state-funded insurance, it's a positive factor. So you yourself are receiving a public benefit is actually a positive factor in this analysis, which seems truly bizarre. Newsflash, undocumented immigrants and most documented immigrants are not eligible for anything but emergency Medicaid in the state of Georgia. If you're receiving Medicare, if you can prove you have resources to cover medical costs, so you've got $1 million sitting in the bank, or potentially more, given how healthcare costs are going these days. But once again, just resources to cover medical costs. What does that mean? How much is enough resources to cover medical costs? If you have a good credit report, or if you have a credit score above or equal to 670, because, you know, in Mexico and Namibia and India, they have credit scores, I guess. I don't know. If you're employed and have a job history, or if you can show job skills, you're a primary caregiver to a child or parent. So it's turned one fairly simple form and a copy of tax returns into a packet that's several inches thick, right? Because you want to put in as many of these positive factors as you can. And coming up with how to show these positive factors is something that we're all still working on. This rule has only been in place since the end of February. And to my knowledge, given processing times and given the fact that USCIS was closed for COVID-19 for 3 months, I don't think anyone has been finally adjudicated under this rule. And there's incredibly little guidance in the regulations as to there's no point system and that you have to get to 10 points in order to pass or anything like that. It leaves a lot of discretion to the individual adjudicator, which is problematic just to say the least. And one negative factor that it's just above the last one in italics and bold is it says adjustment applicant. So if you are applying, just the act of applying for your green card is a negative factor. So you're like already at -1 when you set foot in the room. So there's been a lot of chatter among immigration attorney groups as like, well, how do I show these things? How do you get a letter proving that as soon as my husband has his green card, that my employer will offer coverage to him? How do you show job skills? Well, if you're a skilled carpenter, you don't necessarily have a certificate that says that Amy's a very skilled carpenter, right? So showing all of these things, speaks basic English, can be very easily proven for countries where someone has taken English courses. But what if you're from Jamaica, where of course you speak English because that's your native tongue? How do you show that you speak English? We're not going to, should we make Jamaicans take TOEFL? So there are a lot of questions here, more so than answers right now, and it's very complicated. There's an additional form. You still need to file the I-864, but then on top of it, there's a new form called the I-944 form, and you answer a bunch of questions related to all these listed factors, and then prove a bunch of, send in a bunch of evidence to back up what you're saying about all the different. Anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll keep talking. So if we move on to the next slide, slide number 8. Now, these are the factors that the State Department considers. Notice there aren't as many, and they're different. They did publish at roughly the same time their regulations, but for some reason they didn't decide to make them the same. So the 18 to 61, being healthy, I'm missing the letter B in that as well again. The income, those are all the same, but private health insurance includes Affordable Care Act subsidized in their opinion, and it's heavily weighted as opposed to just a regular factor. Showing you resources. So there are a lot fewer positive factors and a lot fewer negative factors. No one has to worry about getting a credit report. It appears that the State Department understands that the American credit system is a fairly unique being. In the negative factors, sponsor failed to reimburse an agency for public benefits received by a prior sponsored immigrant. So like, let's say I'm filing for my brother now, in addition to having filed for my husband in the past. And my husband took public benefits from the government in that time that I agreed to provide for him. And I forgot to point out, with USCIS, being having multiple prior sponsorships can be negative. And it's like, well, what if it's you're filing for your spouse and your 5 children because you have a big family, but apparently having a large family is considered by USCIS to be a negative factor. So there are the State Department ones as well. The State Department also has a new form. It's not 100% clear when you file that form because there are no instructions about when to file it. Generally, what people have been doing is preparing the packet and having people take it with them to the U.S. Embassy or consulate when they go for their interview. So in paper, and that's, the complexities of trying to ship items to other countries that may or may not have good postal services. But again, we also, in this case, have very little information about how this is all coming into being. There were a number of green card interviews between February 24th when the injunction was lifted and then before things shut down for COVID. Generally, everything shut down Friday the 13th in March, but not enough for anyone to really know, okay, this is how the State Department handles this. And there was very, very little training, both by the State Department and by USCIS of their officers. So once again, there's a lot of concern that one officer in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico may feel one way, but an officer in Mumbai may feel completely differently. And so a lot of concern about inconsistency of application. So just overall, the theme here is that low-income immigrants are being pushed out, right? And it used to be that there were ways to show that even though their immediate family didn't have very many resources, they had people willing to support them. And that's pretty much gone now, is what it seems like. Like I said, we need to see more of how this ends up working in order to really understand. But we can move on to the last slide. And then does anyone have any questions? I feel like I've been talking a bunch.
Are you okay if I stop sharing so we can
Sure.
discuss?
Yeah.
Oh, why does it keep going on? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Does anyone have questions?
One big thing to think of, especially since the majority of you are working with Taharai and are working a lot with survivors of domestic violence and assault and things like that. For most humanitarian forms of relief, public charge is, they're exempt from showing that they will not be a public charge. So to get a U visa, to get a T visa, to get your green card after having a U visa or T visa, asylum or a green card from asylum, refugees getting their green cards, none of those people have to show that. SIJS is another big category, special immigrant juvenile status. Kids who come here on their own due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect do not have to show that they will not be a public charge.
We have a couple questions in the comments.
Oh, sure. Open up the chat.
Cindy asked, what about immigrants who may receive state-based health insurance? For example, in New Jersey, there's something called charity care that immigrants can apply for.
Right, so if we go back to those factors, for on slide 7 for USCIS or on slide 8 for the State Department, if you can prove that, so let's talk about USCIS because that person's in the United States. So there's a positive factor for getting Medicaid CHIP or state-funded insurance, and what you're describing sounds like a state-funded insurance. And you're in New Jersey where they're nice to people and give them state-funded insurance. That does not happen in Georgia or in Arizona where I used to practice. What's not there is there are a couple private clinics in the Atlanta area that have sliding fee schedules or things like that. Proving that you have access to something like that is neither positive or negative in the analysis. And Eileen, I like your comment that it was created with no sense of reality. That's been my opinion for a while on a number of immigration things that have come down the pike, not just in this administration, but in others. For example, the State Department, about, I want to say 8 years ago, moved to all your paperwork. You fill out your application online to get a visa or to get your green card in the United States. And I was very frustrated at the time because, you know, someone living in rural Guatemala doesn't have internet access. And it didn't, in that case, it didn't seem to come from a place of malice. It really seemed to just come from a place of sheer ignorance of the fact that not the whole world has access to the internet like all of us do and are able to video chat on a Friday afternoon. And I've done a lot of soul searching and have decided that I don't really need to think of the motivations for why this is happening. I just need to focus on what I can do for my clients and what is happening. We don't need to get into the why. It'll just drive us crazy. Any other questions?
Jeff asked about Vawa self-petitions. And
oh, Vawa is one of the ones that's exempt. Sorry, I forgot to list that one. they're exempt from the public charge rule. That was a change with Vawa 2012. At one point, they didn't have to show in the past they were a risk for public charge, but they had to show prospectively. But now public charge has nothing to do with Vawa, which is really nice. That was part of the expansion of the I-485 form. Is there a bunch of categories listed on it of people who don't have to show public charge admissibility.
So Emily has asked about WIC. That be a
WIC?
negative factor.
So WIC so I'm fairly certain there are 9 public benefit categories that make you ineligible, that are a negative factor for USCIS, and 8 for State Department. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I'm fairly certain that WIC is not listed at all, because so those who don't know what WIC is, it's women, infants, and children, right? Isn't that what it stands for? And it's coupons that you get with very prescriptive things that you can get at the grocery store for free. And it's like 1 gallon of milk, of dairy milk, or a half gallon of non-dairy milk, and things like that. Is very strict. So that is given to young children, preschool age and under, and it's also given to pregnant women. And pregnant women who are undocumented generally can get WIC. However, the reason they can get WIC is because the government considers that the WIC is not for the actual woman, but it's for the soon-to-be U.S. citizen growing in her belly.
Right, and it includes breastfeeding women as well.
Right, yeah, it includes, breastfeeding women after birth for a certain amount of time. So there's a long way of saying that no, generally that's considered the U.S. citizen child receiving the benefit and not the mother. So I'm fairly certain that WIC is not on the list of either. So it's neither a positive or a negative factor that you receive WIC. But then that also goes back to, if the mother or the child is receiving WIC, then the family is probably low income enough that their income could be a negative factor for things. Does that make sense? Good question.
For some of the clients that you see, like, I worked at the U.S. Department of Labor for 5.5 years doing immigrant labor work. And so a lot of the cases I dealt with were in agriculture, were construction, things like that. So, I didn't get to see the side of their life where I knew, I was usually litigating OSHA and wage hour matters. But in terms of that being like a skill set and being able to predict, this kind of intersects with the fight for fair wages too, because a lot of these folks do come and have a skill set that is needed in this country, whether that's construction, whether that's ag, whether that's being a domestic worker. But because you can work a minimum wage job and still not meet the poverty level, thresholds, it intersects with why we're demanding that folks need to be paid $15 an hour.
Right. I think that's a very good point. And also the point that I sort of made earlier of there are so many skill sets and needed skill sets in the United States that aren't necessarily going to be able to be shown very well on paper. Right. So yeah, there's an intersection of two different things going on. Yes, there are plenty of quite skilled trades that are very undercompensated in the United States right now. And then on top of that, many of those also don't necessarily have credentialing in most other countries. I have friends who have been to trade school in the United States, but that's not necessarily the way things are done elsewhere. And it's not necessarily how things are done here in the United States. There are plenty of people who still learn a trade by essentially apprenticing. Right.
So in terms of proving like a skill set, you can't, like, I remember I was at Innovation Law Lab last month, and I was speaking to an asylum seeker from Mexico, and he was a miner, right? He worked in a mine, but him just writing about his work history as a miner wouldn't be considered sufficient for this application.
That's the other problem that we have right now. Don't really know because we haven't seen any of these fully through to the end. These factors are not very well described in the regulations. I summarized a lot of them on the slides because there was only so much room, but I didn't give you a lot less information than there is in the regulations. So because of that, yeah, how does one show one's work skills? I mean, if you have an associate's in being an administrative assistant, that's pretty quick and easy to show. But yeah, there's so many skills that aren't necessarily reflected on paper. How do you show that? Like, is a self-affidavit sufficient? Is an affidavit from a former employer sufficient? Nobody fully knows the answer to these questions yet, which is really frustrating.
Yeah. We have a couple more questions from Matt. You may have addressed this at the beginning, but I remember hearing talk of public charge rules affecting naturalization. Did anything ever come of those rumors?
To my knowledge, no public charge rules have, with one exception. So there's a negative factor in the USCIS factors that says if you've previously gotten a fee waiver on any other application. So public charge, getting into the law a little bit, you don't have to prove that you're admissible in order to naturalize. You have to prove several other things, including good moral character and presence in the United States. So where it could come into play is into good moral character, right? Like, let's say you filed an affidavit of support for someone, that form I-864, a number of years ago, potentially that, and then you stopped working, and now you're saying, I have no income, please don't make me pay for my naturalization. So that could affect the green card holder and you, but not directly in your naturalization. Just like it doesn't directly affect you for your kids to be getting benefits, but it could tangentially affect you. But yeah, that was there was a lot of speculation and talk going on about that, and there has been some encouragement of asking people when they naturalize to not ask for a fee waiver because of that new factor.
Emily is asking, is it true that tax transcripts, not just tax returns, are now required for adjustment, also for consular processing?
Yes, that is true. I forgot to mention that, but yeah, it used to be you just filed a copy of your tax return and the government decided that you could have just made up all those numbers and then put different numbers on what you actually filed. So now you have to file a tax transcript that you obtain from the IRS. For a lot of my clients, the process of getting a tax transcript is rather long and complicated due to the fact that if you don't have a social security number, you can't ask for it online. Like, I've gone and got mine online very quickly, but if you're filing with an ITIN, individual tax identification number, which is what someone who is working in the United States or living in the United States but does not have a social security number can get in order to still be able to file their tax returns. Generally, those people have to request it by mail, and it's a fairly long and drawn out process that's only longer right now because so many offices are shut down due to the current pandemic.
Emily also had a question separate from that one about whether you've been advising clients to pay application fees whenever possible as opposed to fee waivers.
Yeah, we've changed our tactics a little bit, but at the same time, it's sort of a perfect storm. USCIS has gotten much, much, much stricter with their fee waivers.
Right.
So it's become less of an issue because most of the time our clients are having to pay their fees or find a way to pay their fees because USCIS isn't really granting them. So there's a little bit of the public charge stuff going on because, like, let's say I'm doing a U visa with someone
Right.
and getting their green card with them, and public charge doesn't count for that. But then they want to petition for various family members later on down the road through the family-based immigration, where public charge does come in, and prior fee waivers with USCIS is a negative factor on their list. So it's definitely something that we talk through now and think about a little bit more. It used to be, oh, you don't have to pay? Great, you don't have to pay. Let's file your fee waiver.
Right, right. And I can't remember, does it come up for the petitioners themselves when they're adjusting?
So petition, well, and that's another place where the regulations aren't clear. It doesn't say whose prior fee waivers are a negative factor. So are they looking at the petitioner/sponsor, or are they looking at the beneficiary, the person who's getting the green card? It doesn't say, so we don't know yet.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of answers of I don't know, and I'm sorry, but I wish I knew, because I wish I could give better advice to my client these days.
No, I mean, we're getting fee waiver rejections from USIS for folks that are on who we've shown are eligible for public benefits. We're still getting rejections. So we had a client that we had evidence or verification that she was receiving WIC, and we still got a rejection of her fee waiver.
Yeah, that's becoming more and more common for us. Showing the client is low income is still decently successful in our cases, but so many of our clients work under the table, don't have a tax transcript that they can file with us, or don't have a W-2 or a 1099. So that makes it very hard, or even like a pay stub, right? Because they're just handed cash at the end of the day.
Right. We have a few more minutes if anyone else has questions they want to ask. No? Well, I really enjoyed this presentation, Amy. It's always overwhelming for me to think about the quota system, and now the intersection of the quota system with this, and all of the negative and positive factors. It's a lot of information, and you've made it very digestible. I know a couple people messaged me about wanting to get this PowerPoint. Would that be okay with you?
Oh yeah, please do share the PowerPoint with anyone who attended, and I'll put my email address in the chat box. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. I am very frequently the person who remembers the question I had for the doctor 10 minutes down the road, so you're not going to bother me if you send me an email.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for presenting today, and thank you to all our attendees. We have one last presentation on Monday at 11, I believe, with the social services managers at Tahereh, so our very own Eileen, and the two social services managers at Kids in Need of Defense here in Atlanta and GAIN, and they'll be talking about the social services aspect of serving this vulnerable population. So I hope all of you tune into that on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you again, Amy.
Thank you, everyone. Great questions.